80% of falls in the home occur in the bathroom. Don't put yourself or a loved one at risk. There's a safe bathing system for everyone's budget.
Enjoy a bathing experience that combines safety, comfort, and excellence. If assisted living is not for you, a BCI walk-in tub may well be the answer, giving you the safety and freedom to live independently. A BCI walk-in tub is the most affordable and comfortable walk-in tub in the market today. With our dual drain technology, your tub will drain quickly, and for those that still like the feature of a shower, our two-way bliss gives you both a handheld and overhead shower head. We offer the best financing in the industry with payments as low as $99 per month or no interest, no payments for 18 months with approved credit. For comfort, safety, price, and selection, it's got to be BCI Walk-In Tub. Be one of the first 50 callers and save $1,500.
Call 800-354-4377, 800-354-4377 for a free no obligation in-home consultation.
Welcome to the Turnpike Sports Spotlight. Dave Weishottle with you. The gambling industry is spreading across this country. Every week there seems to be a new casino or a new sports book opening up. And now more than ever, it is so important to address the issue of problem gambling. That's why I'm so glad that an organization like the Kindbridge Research Institute is out there. They're doing incredible and I think groundbreaking work when it comes to the issue of problem gambling. And to find out more about the Kindbridge Research Institute, we have its director and vice chair, Daniel Umfleet, on the line with us right now. Daniel, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. And I got to tell you, doing research for this interview, I read up on the Kindbridge Research Institute, and it's just an amazing organization. Tell us something about the Kindbridge Research Institute.
So the Kindbridge Research Institute was founded in 2020. The reason that we founded it was we started looking at what peer-reviewed research in the space was available in the topic of military research related to problem gambling issues. And what we found was an extreme lack of sort of high-level peer-reviewed research that had been done on a substantial population for this particular disease type. And we sort of knew if we wanted to start to break the molds and get some good programs in place that we were going to need some good evidence-based research to back up what our hypothesis was, which was that military personnel, veterans, PTSD individuals with TBIs, traumatic brain injuries that served had a higher propensity to gamble, and also were also at a higher risk to develop a gambling problem. So we took it upon ourselves to form the Research Institute, and we developed a couple of immediate partnerships with Rutgers University, Bowling Green State University, and University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And we went to work on putting some of our hypotheses to the tests and using some of the best researchers on the planet to get us to some answers that made sense. And we're about 3 years into it, and we're starting to see some pretty interesting things. We've produced a lot of research in coordination with those universities around the subject of military mental health and problem gambling. And we're starting to form programs and put infrastructure and architecture into some states that are looking to have better services available for their retired military personnel.
Well, let me ask you something. In terms of problem gambling, what is the mission of the Kindbridge Research Institute? What are you hoping to achieve with the programs that the Kindbridge Research Institute implements?
I think some transparency and stability in government programs where the access to care needs to be sort of at the front of the mind for legislators and regulators that are watching what's happening with sports betting and iGaming. So ultimately, everything that we're doing is going to put a lot of design work into infrastructure that will be access for individuals who need healthcare resources for this particular problem. And we want to give them all of the evidence that they need and all of the product and tools that they need to make informed decisions on what state programs need to look like, or what sort of regulations can be put into the operator platforms and make connections to healthcare through product for folks that are directly on the gambling platforms themselves. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, now let me ask you something. You mentioned military and the veterans and our active military. I mean, is that your focus at Kindbridge, or are there other segments of the population that could benefit from what Kindbridge is doing?
So that's a really good question. So there are multiple populations that we want to focus on.
Sure.
Some are getting more priority than others just because of the demand coming in and the requests coming in from regulators for specific types of programs. But like the 5 areas that we really want to focus on are veterans, Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, and professional and amateur athletes. Right. So each one of those categories have different challenges when it comes to mental health and when it comes to access to mental health resources in the United States. Each one sees the world through a different lens. They experience the world in a different way. And so healthcare needs to be sort of thought through in a specific way that will give them access to the right kinds of resources with the right sort of competencies that give these individuals the confidence to heal and move on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about that. When it comes to these segments of our population, is there something that makes them particularly susceptible to problem gambling? I mean, is there something in their background or their common experiences which makes problem gambling more of an issue to these segments of our population?
Some of it is, like for professional and amateur athletes, like there's a much higher appetite for risk. Right. Competition is extremely high. They're in an environment pretty much 24/7 their entire life where they're competing with their peers. They're competing with anyone that they're playing against. And they're extremely good at what they do. And a lot of that translates into risk taking and other factors and other forms that they do in their private life. Right. And so, gambling happens to be one of the activities that individuals can weigh risk rewards and decide whether or not they're going to go after the reward and by taking the risk. And for professional and amateur athletes, it's just that's really what it kind of boils down to. Vets, you get a complex mix of issues. A lot of it, can be boiled down to things that they experienced while they were in active duty, wartime experiences where they were actually, deployed for multiple times and dealt with extremely long times of loneliness and separation from the family, or witnessed events over there that left them with post-traumatic stress disorder or injuries that limited their functionality physically, or traumatic brain injuries, like traumatic brain injuries are a big one. And then a lot of the other populations, some of it is socioeconomic status, access to the right level of education, access to the right kind of jobs. Some of the other populations also have substance use disorder issues amongst them, stigma surrounding financial issues and problems in the family. So it really all starts to just kind of add up, where each one of these kind of needs to be looked at a little bit different. Like there's some basics that everybody needs, of course. But when it comes to like really segmenting these populations and building disciplines that are unique to them is sort of where we want to focus now and in the future. Because like these are portions of the population that just need the right types of resources to recover in situations like this.
Sure. I mean, in your opinion, what is the state of this country for treatment and treatment centers for the issue of problem gambling? Because I read a lot of stuff about Kindbridge, and no one in the gambling industry is doing the kind of work that you're doing. I mean, in your opinion, are the centers getting the message out that we're here to offer help, and here's how to get in touch with us. Because, like I said in the opening, I mean, I think what you're doing is groundbreaking. I haven't seen it from other places around this country.
Yeah, it's, it kind of depends on how you look at it. Like on a state by state basis, it's managed different.
Yeah.
Right. So like some programs have got pretty robust programs, which are like, you call a 1-800 number and then they're going to kind of route you towards resources that are there in the state. The problem that we come into with that is like a lot of times it's like you call the 1-800 number, it's sort of like a de-escalation process, like a crisis hotline.
Sure.
And then they give you a list of resources, and then you never know what happens to an individual after that. You don't know if they call, you don't know if they go into care, you don't know if they complete care, you don't know if their quality of life gets any better as they go through care. Like it's a complete void. Like we have no clue what happens once they call the hotline, right? All we're really kind of doing at the national level is collecting numbers on how many people are calling a hotline. For care in the community, like what we're finding is that if you kind of go across like SAMHSA facilities, SUD facilities, there's not really much by way of standards that are implemented across these facilities that say that they actually treat individuals with a gambling problem. It's more like a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
It's, a list of disease types, and someone in the administrative office for that particular facility said, all right, well, yeah, we'll take gambling disorder. But when you get into it and sort of unpack it, you realize they have no discipline for it. They've never seen it. They don't really know how to screen for it. Or they've seen it once or twice, and it's just like, it's like a tick box exercise, so to speak, right? And then across the country, one of the big gaping holes that we recognized really quick was, there's one certification board that is generally accepted across most states. Some states have their own certification process for counselors, which is slightly different than the international certification process. And there's really only about 1,000 counselors across the entire country that are trained to treat gambling disorder, which in the grand scheme of things is a drop in the ocean compared to the population size, right? And when you actually look at where those counselors are located, most of them are consolidated to the coasts, big states like New York, big states like California, with like nothing in the middle. Very, 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 very little in the middle, right? And so when you think about every state that's legalized and how many states we have legalized now, and when you think about the fact that iGaming is attempting to get into pretty much every state where sports betting's legalized, albeit much slower, you're 5 years away from having all of these products in the market where, 24/7 access is just going to heighten the issue of individuals out in the community that are going to experience harm related to this. And we don't have any infrastructure. We don't have any real sizable infrastructure to support what's going to happen out in the communities and what's already happening, right? Like what we've seen. So just to draw some attention to how we work. So we got the Research Institute, which does all sorts of evidence-based research on this subject, looking at population health, looking at specific individual populations that are going to be impacted that we know of more than others, looking at resources for them, looking at infrastructure for them, looking at architecture for them from a treatment landscape. And then on the other side of the equation, we also started building a mental health clinic, a virtual mental health clinic called Kindbridge Behavioral Health, which could actually help process individuals that were presenting with a gambling problem, right? Okay. So like one of the biggest challenges that we found really early on was that, again, I kind of come back to like a hotline is called, we don't know what happens next. Well, we wanted to know what happens next, right? So we built a workforce and a mental health company that works virtually and has licensed clinicians that are employed that use technology that help us predict outcomes, track outcomes, understand outcomes for individuals based off of the way that they present. And that individual service has grown exponentially over the course of the last 3 years to the tune where we're hiring 5 or 6 new therapists pretty much every other month. our capacity keeps increasing as the demand continues to increase. We're now covering 43 states plus Puerto Rico, and we've just opened operations in Ontario, Canada. And we're getting demand to actually take that service overseas as well, over into the UK and down into Australia. So like all we're really doing is organizing the space in a way where we can get some answers is pretty much what we're after, right? But I come back to your original question of what does the treatment landscape look like across the U.S. at the moment? It looks extremely fragmented. Mm-hmm. It looks kind of bare, and there's no quality controls over this particular disease type, and there's no real focus at a national level or a federal level on this particular disease, which, you know, like up until 5 years ago, sports betting wasn't legal. We all knew that it was going on behind the scenes, but there was no legal framework for it, which, you know, kind of in the healthcare world, it's like you see disease bubble up all the time for substance abuse, for drug abuse, these types of things. But you also have data collected on these disease types. For problem gambling, data's never really been well collected for these disease types or for this particular disease. So it's hard to make an argument on what the prevalence of this is out in the community. It's hard to make an argument that this is something that needs more federal attention. Like when you don't have numbers and you don't have evidence, it's hard to make a case, right? So for us, it's like we see it, we know it's there. All we're wanting to do is make it presentable and transparent in what's happening, and make sure that the right kind of resources are there in the future where they're lacking now. So, you know, sum it up, like there's not a lot there. And what's interesting is now that we've sort of broken into the space and kind of broken everything, I wouldn't call it wide open, but there's a crack in there that we're starting to squeeze through, right? Sure. Like we get calls kind of on the regular now from like VCs and private equity companies that are like all doing research into, you know, what is going on in the community with problem gambling. We know that there's not a lot of resources out there. You know, we can come to the table if it looks like the resources need to be put in place, or like the physical infrastructure needs to be put in place to help scale the types of resources that need to be out there in the community, you know, if it's showing that there's enough demand to support, right? And like I'm getting calls like that. Honestly, it's like at least once a week right now. Mm-hmm. I'm being asked by healthcare leaders sort of across the community of across the country of like, what is this looking like? What is this going to look like? Because there's a lot of curiosity, because more folks are picking up on it.
Well, let me ask you about some specifics. I mean, you mentioned, and one of the great things you're doing is really helping our veterans and our active duty military. What are some of the specific programs that you offer in the area of problem gambling geared toward the veterans and the active duty military?
So I'll just use the state of Colorado as an example, right? Sure. So for the state of Colorado, we're doing 4 things, right? One is an access to care program, which is specifically for veterans and their families of individuals that are impacted by a gambling problem. So it's what we often find is the individual with the gambling problem is not typically the first person to present when they reach out to us. It's typically the wife, or it's typically the girlfriend, or it's the son or the daughter that's recognized that there's some sort of problem, and they're impacted by it because of what's going on in the household with the finances and the amount of stress that's going through. Mm-hmm. And they need someone to talk to. And then they also are curious, like how to approach and talk to the individual at the right time about what they're seeing and help them get help. Right. So we've got that program going on in Colorado, which is available to all veterans and their family members in the state of Colorado. And then we are also starting to run peer support and educational groups, which are open to all veterans, all their family members. They're running weekly. They can pop in. They're all done virtually. All you got to do is go to the website and you can register to attend these things. And they're just educational sessions that focus on what this is, how this feels, and how to approach getting help to it, and how to think about solving the problem or beginning to solve the problem, and what care journeys look like. So those groups are being run every single week in Colorado. And then the other thing that we really wanted to focus on was actually building the research pool of young and upcoming researchers that are interested in this subject, right? So we run a program called the Colorado Military Research Fellowship in the state of Colorado, where we're taking veterans who are interested in working in the mental health space, and we're giving them a year of training on how to write research papers, how to read research papers, looking at specific topics related to problem gambling across the spectrum, and getting them to do several research projects along that year that are going to put a lot more material out into the community around problem gambling. And then we're helping get them placed at one of the top universities for mental health or mental health administration or healthcare administration, so that they can go into the workforce already understanding the problem as best as they possibly can, already understanding the military angle as best as they possibly can. And then we can sort of patriate the next generation of leaders in the workforce for healthcare, understanding the ins and outs of problem gambling. So that's a really good program. We're linked up, and the military research fellows will either get placed at Harvard or they'll get placed at Johns Hopkins. Okay. Which is a great program. And then we're also developing a ROTC training program for the young officer candidates that are at the universities here in Colorado, which is all around unit readiness. So recognizing early what some of these patterns and behaviors look like amongst your peers when, it's sort of an invisible disease to everyone else, but look for some telltale signs, and then notice some things amongst your own behaviors when it comes to the way that you're looking at sports betting and the way that you're looking at gambling, and also just sort of understand what happens to you from a military perspective if the situation gets out of control and how at risk your career is. So those are 4 programs that we're running in Colorado now that give the 350,000 veterans in the state of Colorado and all of their family members and the young officers in training, access to the right kind of resources to get the right kind of information and to get the right kind of help that understands from a military perspective what it's like to have a gambling problem and be in the military or a veteran of the military, right? So there's a lot of interest in rolling this out across multiple states. And I think that's, this is one of those things where it's you just put the right kind of infrastructure in, you put the right kind of pathways to the information in, and you make it all accessible. Colorado was great. They made all this accessible to the veterans at no cost to the veterans, which was fantastic. So kudos to them for that.
Great.
And I think as you eliminate a lot of those barriers and you just make it more accessible, you just reach out into the community and you help as much as you possibly can.
Well, you mentioned states, and one of the things about this country is that the gambling industry is regulated on a state-by-state basis. How closely do you work with the state and the state agencies and the regulators regarding the issue of problem gambling? What is that relationship like between the state and Kindbridge?
Developing, for Colorado, it's nice. It's really smooth. We've been in the state now for a while, and we're sort of familiar with the leadership here. And if we're ever asked to provide evidence on anything, we're happy to jump in and provide evidence. And they're good. They're very collaborative. They're very communicative. There's other states that have expressed interest in a lot of the programs that we do. Another program that we help facilitate in the state of Colorado is the athlete well-being program, right? And that's garnished a lot of curiosity from a handful of additional states, which are all curious from an athlete harassment perspective, what some of the potential solutions look like to help the athletes get access to the right kind of resources and give them the right kind of environment to be able to report if they're being harassed due to a sports bettor who is, on a roll, trying to influence the outcome of a match, or someone who, didn't hit the bet and is just disgruntled and wants to take it out on the athlete. So like as those programs start to get deployed here in Colorado, there's a lot of eyes on them from a handful of different states to see, one, will the kids use it? Because there's a harassment reporting mechanism inside of the app that is getting put out into the NCAA schools here in Colorado, where the student athlete can just jump on and fill in a form and let us know what the harassment looks like. And then that goes to university administrators. It'll go to local law enforcement. And if it's deemed a credible enough threat, it'll go to the local FBI office here in Denver. And so also inside of that app is a bunch of education modules on anti-match fixing, on social media integrity, on athlete well-being, and a link to clinicians that can help in the event that the student athlete is overwhelmed or the harassment is impacted and they form some sort of depression or they're having performance anxiety on the court type thing. So like giving them all these resources in one single app seems to be attractive. And then like there's other states out there that are starting to think about regulation on this and rules and laws on this, where, if sports bettors are found harassing athletes, then they basically get banned from all the books in the state type thing. Mm-hmm. So like there's enforcement mechanisms out there that like we're trying to work on to make it easier for the regulators to have some answers and gather some data on these particular topics. And several of the other regulators across the state have asked for presentations. They've asked for us to get a little bit more involved in the state. And so like it's developing, right? Everything just sort of becomes program development, monitoring, measuring, providing the right kind of information to kind of keep your finger on what's going on out in the community. And, as long as we keep doing that, then I think our relationship with the regulators just keeps getting better and better.
I'm curious, how much support have you gotten from the gambling operators themselves? I mean, with the spread of sports betting, I know a lot of sportsbook operators are really getting involved in the problem gambling programs. I mean, have you had any contact with them? Do you work with any of them with Kindbridge? Tell us what the relationship is with the gambling operators themselves.
Honestly, this wouldn't be possible without a handful of them, right? So we were very blessed in the beginning, and we took everything that we wanted to do with the military program to DraftKings, and DraftKings basically signed on board pretty much immediately and said, we love this. We want to help as much as we possibly can. And they have done. They've made multi-year commitments to us, helped us really develop these programs and get them out into the community, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Another huge supporter for us from the population health perspective and also from the military perspective is a group called Playtech. They're pretty small in the U.S., but they are getting bigger. They're mainly out of the UK and across Europe, and they've been massively helpful. And as of recently, we've also gotten a lot of help coming out of that MGM, right?
Oh,
so like a lot of the bigs are starting to pay attention to what we're doing. And also like one of the easy conversations with them is like for something like what we're doing on the research side, and then for something like what we're doing on the healthcare delivery side, right? Like the clinic is really focused on being a center of excellence for this particular issue. And it's really focused on getting as far and as wide as it possibly can and as deep into the communities across the states as it possibly can. Like one of the ways to actually help scale those types of resources is to work closely with the operators and use their size and their scale to help get the message out into the community that these resources exist, and then give those operators access to product or services that allows for the individual who has a problem that gets onto their platform or comes into their casino to immediately get routed into a care program where they can just immediately schedule an appointment and get access to some resources and some self-help tools straight away, right? So like, I think the more that we navigate the roadmap on integrating directly with operators on the care side of the equation, the more that that's going to end up fueling the research side of the equation, which just sort of creates this environment where you've got a continuous improvement loop going, and you can create really good product, really good services, and everybody's happy because everybody wins. And anyone out in the community that gets harmed from this has got real resources that they can immediately reach out to. So like the long and short of it is we've got some good relationships with a handful of operators and some relationships that are developing with some new operators in our mix. And so like, I don't think you could do this without the operators. Mm-hmm. I think it would be damn near impossible, to be quite frank. Right. With no federal oversight for this, with no federal regulations for this, like the only way that you're going to actually start to solve this problem is if you collaboratively work together with the regulators, with the legislators, with the operators, and really just make healthcare as transparent in the space as you possibly can, and then use the right kind of information and the right kind of data to inform policy, to help everyone make decisions, and to get the right kind of protections out in the community.
You know, I live here in New Jersey, and, you know, every time I watch a game on television, there's a sportsbook advertising and an online casino advertising. I mean, I drive down the street, I see billboards for casinos or sportsbooks. Like I said, I see a lot of commercials. I hear a lot of commercials. On this show, I've read a lot of commercials, and the one thing we all say is, you have a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In your opinion, is the media doing enough in the world of problem gambling, and does Kindbridge have any plans with regard to media and the issue of problem gambling?
No and yes.
Okay.
Right. So the thing that I find with the media, though, is that, I mean, the media doesn't know, like a 1-800 number is a really easy thing to just put up and say, hey, look, we're doing something.
Yep.
Right. Like my experience so far with media is that media doesn't know, you know, like they don't know the extent of what they need to be promoting. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of times it comes down to like, hey, look, this is what the regulators say to promote. Therefore, this is what we're going to promote. That's their job to keep protections in place. It's our job to get, you know, viewers in front of product, basically. Right. So, you know, it's like this sort of, you know, we will do as much as the regulators tell us to do. And in my experience, and this isn't with all of them, right? This isn't with everybody, but like they won't often go above and beyond. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think it's sort of like early days on what you're going to end up seeing happening with advertising over here. I mean, like we saw a lot of advertising, like there's a massive advertising blitz in Europe for a really long time. You know, there was lots of advertisements that were in games. There were announcers that were talking about sports betting in games. Like periodic or over the course of the last couple of years, a lot of that's just been sort of stamped out. You know, like whistle to whistle bans, no more talking about sports betting in the game, no more advertising during the game type thing. And it's like it all kind of goes through this, you know, early market access for everyone. It's a new product. Everybody's trying to get, you know, players on board. They're trying to attract individuals to their platform. And so there's this massive media blitz, massive spend on advertising, massive incentive by some states to get folks onto the platforms because everybody's after the tax dollars, right? And then you're just going to kind of see it peak, and then you're going to see it start to taper itself back, where you're probably going to get some tighter restrictions on what can be advertised, when they can be advertised. And then I think all of that evolution that's going to take place will also see a change in what all is advertised when you see the advertisements for problem gambling resources or responsible gambling resources as well, right? So I think it's just going to be an evolution. I don't think particularly that the media does a great job of getting responsible gambling advertising out into the communities.
Sure.
You know, but I do think that it will, like I said, I think it's an evolution. I think we'll probably see some step changes here in the next 18 to 24 months in a handful of states. And then I think, like what I'm recognizing with a lot of these regulators is as soon as one of them does it, 3 more are thinking about doing it, 5 more end up doing it in the next 18 to 24 months type thing. And then it's just sort of like this domino effect. So I think it'll change. I do think it'll change. And then like for us, a lot of what we work on is like direct integration. So we kind of recognized early, like, we were a small fish in this pond. And in the beginning, just like every other startup, nobody's really taking you seriously. And the more credibility we got, the more people we got under our belt, the more companies we got under our belt that we worked with. One of the things that we recognized easy is like this younger generation of individuals that are gambling or sports betting. They're doing it. Everything's done through their phone.
Yeah.
Right. So like when you think about, what is a clean and sleek way of getting the resources that they want in front of them, I think like direct integration with some of these sports books or direct integration with some of these health apps, like mindfulness style apps or elite coaching apps or things like that, like having our resources sort of packaged inside of things that already exist, where the individual can access it and get education to it and access to the network for this particular issue, is something that we've been doing in the background sort of quietly, and it's really starting to work, right? So like we're kind of finding it's one of those things where it doesn't necessarily need to have a ton of media attention given to it. If it's already in the things that they're using, they have a tendency to use it. Right. Yeah. So we're trying to come at it from a bunch of different angles because this is a behemoth of an industry.
Yes,
right?
It is.
And it is really hard to get folks to take this particular topic seriously until there's a reason to do it, until a regulator tells them to do it most of the time. Right. And so from a healthcare perspective, like there's a massive telehealth boom that's been going across the country since COVID. And tele is one of those things where like pre-COVID, it was used about 1% of total clinical operations were leveraging tele to get the care out into the community. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing closer to 15%. And I think like a really healthy volume or really healthy mix of like in-person versus telecare, when you look across other countries that have integrated tele into their healthcare system really well, you see about 25% of all clinical work, all medical work being done in a tele setting. So we've got a lot of room to run because the American healthcare system is also another absolute giant that eclipses sports betting, right?
Yeah.
So you got multiple things that are sort of working in your favor here where telehealth is attempting to have its heyday and become sort of normalized out in American culture as a way that you actually interact and get care. And you've got the casino industry, regulators, operators, all of the above that are looking for good solutions to get folks access to the right kind of resources using the right kind of methodologies that aren't just promoting a phone number and then not having any understanding of what happens with that individual after they call that number ever again. Right. So I think for us, we're just trying to get smarter with how this is handled and build the right kind of systems to support, again, transparency and evidence-based for pretty much everything that we're doing. And like, I want to make sure that the message here is not, like 1-800-GAMBLER and the hotlines are a 100% necessity. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that they should not exist in the least, right? Like from a crisis hotline perspective, those crisis hotlines are extremely important for people who are in immediate need and need a de-escalation process and need to be routed to an emergency room. Like you see it with every single disease type, right? So those are 100% necessary. Now, it's also necessary to have the components underneath that can support the individual when they need access to care after the crisis has subsided and they are ready to engage in a care journey, right? So I think they can't exist without one another, just like every other disease type. And so I think we're probably going to hopefully move into a state of play here in the near future where both sort of exist symbiotically and you'll see sort of both promoted side by side.
Well, let me ask about the near future. I know Kindbridge has some amazing plans in the future, and you're working on some great stuff to help with the issue of problem gambling. What can we expect from Kindbridge in the coming months and the near future?
Direct integrations with some of the major operators, some of the major sports books, some of the fantasy sports books as well. Wider programs for states that are interested in basically piggybacking off of the success that we've had here in the state of Colorado. And I think just probably more interaction from our leadership team with regulators and legislators to help provide evidence and to help inform what future policy looks like, right? So I'd say, also, we're working on some tech in the background. We've got an enhanced user experience that's going to be introduced on the website here in the next 6 weeks.
Wow, great.
So the website for Kindbridge Behavioral Health is going to get a complete reboot with a different menu, or a not different menu, but a wider menu of services. So we're able to do med management through some of our partners. We've got access to psychiatry networks through some of our partners. So, the clinical counseling element is going to widen out into a wide range of healthcare services for the individual, where when they present for whatever they present, because oftentimes, like pretty much all the time, when an individual presents with a gambling problem, there's additional comorbidities or co-occurring addictions that accompany the gambling problem. And so we found that basically the way we want to start thinking about care is also routing individuals to the additional resources that they need that go beyond just typical mental health counseling for this particular issue. So a wider range of services, including med management as well for individuals that are already on medications when they present. All of these things are going to shortly become available through Kindbridge Behavioral Health. Kindbridge Research Institute is working on a couple of different innovative approaches to looking at harm out in the community. Prevalence work is extremely complicated to do when you do it as detailed as it needs to be done. So we're working on an interesting methodology to kind of keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the community from a harm perspective. And then we're looking at advertising as well. And we're looking at the impact of advertising on the communities, and looking at the different types of advertisement that's being used and the amount of money that's being pumped into the advertising in specific markets, and looking at correlation between the amount of money that's being pumped into advertising in specific markets and like, what is that doing to the care population in those particular markets? Is there like a link between more money being spent with more advertising, and then are we seeing more harm out in the community for people actually presenting for care? Like those types of things. I think things get interesting. And we're helping to fund a research program at UNLV that is with the VA treatment facility out there.
Great.
Where they're looking at clinical testing for a drug that could potentially curb gambling problems.
Wow.
Which is very interesting, right?
Very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we're trying really hard to push the envelope and make sure that as all of this continues to just spread across the country, everybody's got everything that they need to make informed decisions. And again, that's just everything that it comes down to is you have to be able to measure outcomes one way or another. You have to be able to measure impact somehow, and you have to be able to provide evidence that the programs that we believe need to be in the community are having some sort of impact on the community, right? And so, the only way we knew that we could do that was by establishing a really good research arm and actually establishing a clinic that could take care of all of this business that needs to be done for an individual who needs access to care, and get to some conclusions as to what sort of clinical methodologies, what sort of approaches to therapy work on individuals with a gambling problem, and actually be able to, put it up there on a wall as numbers and say, like CBT therapy works, right? Or ACT therapy works, right? These are things that it's like, you got to be able to do, and you got to be able to do it pretty well.
Sure.
If you want to, I think, keep pushing the envelope and breaking down boundaries with these things, right? So, I'd say that's what you can expect from us in the future.
Well, Daniel, we're running out of time, but can you give out a website or a way that people can contact the Kindbridge Research Institute to find out more about it and to reach out for help if they need it?
Absolutely. So if you wanted to go see what we're doing at the Research Institute and engage us on anything that you're curious on at like a state level or a regulatory level, you can go to kindbridgeinstitute.org. And if you are an individual that is looking for care, or if you're an operator that's looking for programs to deploy through your own platforms, you can go to kindbridge.com.
Daniel Umfleet, Director and Vice Chair of the Kindbridge Research Institute, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us all about the Institute and the incredible work they're doing with the issue of problem gambling. And we encourage anyone who feels they have a problem with regard to gambling, please get in touch with places like Kindbridge Research Institute, because they are really changing lives for the better. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That'll do it for us this week. We'll see you next time on the Turnpike.